I actually had an idea to draw a couple of parallels for this particular video, and if I don't end up meandering off the subject at hand and start blabbering in side issues or something like that, I'll tie it all together. Hopefully, I don't. If I was smarter at this and I was not quite, and I had a little bit more extra spare time on my hands, I'd probably write out what I wanted to talk about, or at least get some bulleted points before I get started with these. But I just never get around to doing that. So generally, I get a few scattered ideas here and there, and I think, maybe if I get a spare moment and I decide, to make one of these, I'll just start throwing things out and see where it goes. I could probably benefit from a script on occasion, but I haven't ever gotten around to doing that. But the thing that I wanted to kind of address in this one is in regards to a type of superstitious behavior or a type of superstitious thinking that I developed early in life, and I kind of think it had something to do with what contributed to the severity of my drinking problem much later on. And I'll explain that a little bit, but the very first thing that popped into my head when I thought about drawing the parallel is I've said on here before that I was raised and had the Catholic Church rammed down my throat to some degree. I could go into a couple of more videos, topics on that and tie it with AA, but for now I'm just going to stick to what I was thinking about when I started this video, and it was, I remember when one particular funny story, believe it or not, I was going to tell, because there's so many incidents, but I just happened to think of this one. When I was very, very young, and this is embarrassing as hell for me to admit this. This is not something I want to admit, actually. But when I was very young, I was actually an altar boy at one point. And yeah, I actually said that on a fucking video. It's embarrassing. It's cringe. But and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about the rituals and everything that goes on in the Catholic Church, but I was going to talk about the fact that generally in the churches where I grew up, the Catholic churches, when they have a mass, they don't have a service like the Protestants do. They have a mass. You have three people involved, three boys involved. You have two they carry candles. You have one that carries a crucifix or a cross. And you have various responsibilities throughout the Mass. I won't go into the whole long detail. It's not really important. But I remember there was always this thing among, like, if you had three boys in the back that were trying to put their robes on and get dressed up for the ceremony, I guess is the right word I would use for it. There was always kind of this contention about who's going to carry the cross, because if you carried the cross, you had more responsibilities, but it was also, for some silly reason, it was looked at as being a little bit above the guy carrying the candles or the kid carrying the candles. I remember this particular event very well, because I thought for a long time afterward I was going to burn in hell for this. But these two guys was back with me on one Sunday morning, and one of them was saying he wanted to carry the cross, and the other one was saying he wanted to carry the cross. Only as little kids can argue and do. I don't remember how old I was. I wasn't very old. I was pretty young. But it was kind of funny, because one of them was saying, well, I'm taller than you, so I should carry the cross. And the other one was saying, yeah, but I'm more strong and well built than you, so I should carry the cross. And at one point, I don't know if there's any Catholics watching this, or former Catholics like myself, but the crucifix, the depiction of Christ on the cross, is considered really, really sacred in the Catholic Church. So touching it or holding it or anything like that was akin to, touching God himself, or a piece of him, for lack of a better word. But the kid had the cross in his hand, and he said, I want you to get something straight. Well, let's all get something straight here right now. He said, I'm going to carry this goddamn fucking cross up to the fucking altar. You got me? I thought we were all going to be hit with lightning bolts or whatever. But the thing got a little bit more heated, and they ended up in a fist fight, and I got kind of sucked into I was trying to actually separate us before we all got in trouble, but the crucifix got knocked over. It broke in half. The stand it was on a wooden stand. It snapped in half, and the crucifix ended up on the floor, and I stepped on it, and I really thought I was going to be punished for this. At this moment, of course, the priest comes in, and he catches us, and he's highly upset, old son of a bitch that he turned out to be, but he made us all go out, and he made us all tell our parents that he needed to talk to our parents after it was all over with. And of course we were all terrified, and we were all afraid, because believe it or not, in tight-knit Catholic-style communities like this, if you actually do something along these lines, it's considered like a big disgrace to your entire family, to everybody, you know. So at one point during this mass, when we walk up there to the altars and we're doing, you know, the going through the motions, one of the kids, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Holy Communion thing, but one of the kids that was with me at the time on the altar, he had just taken the Holy Communion, and he chewed it up, and he did his tongue out like that, and he had it all wadded up. You know, childhood antics. For the most part, but of course in the church that's considered like, you know, the sacred body of Christ that you have just eaten, and so that was really akin to just, you know, absolute blasphemy. I mean, that was blasphemy, like, you know, that was just dark, deep blasphemy. So after it's over with, they have all the kids' parents back there. My parents are back there. It was kind of funny. I remember I was looking at my dad, and I knew my dad. I knew him really well. And the way he had his hand over his mouth and was doing like this, I knew he was trying not to bust out laughing while the priest was delivering this fire and brimstone, you know, lecture towards us, and then talking to our parents at the same time in the back of the church. And you could see the parents, you know, turning red with rage. A lot of us knew we were going to get punished for this. I looked at my dad. I kind of saw the way he was smiling, and I said, okay, I probably won't get punished by him. I looked at my mother, and I said, I'm in for it when I get home. But at the time when it was all over with, the priest looks at us and he says, you know, you can't even go to purgatory for what you've done. You know, the Catholics believe in purgatory. It's kind of like you almost, but not quite, go to hell. But if you get to purgatory, you might get up to heaven. But if you go straight to hell, there's no getting out of that. And he said, you boys won't even be given purgatory for that. You'll definitely go to hell for that. You know, and I remember it was a big deal because it was, like I said, it was considered a disgrace to your family. It was considered a disgrace to everybody that, you know, you would do something like this, get in a fight in the church itself. And and I remember the funny thing about it was, like I said, both my father and my grandfather kind of found this amusing. My grandfather said, well, why didn't you just pick the fucking crucifix up and hit the priest in the head with it if he was being like that? Which I could get into another story about the history of that, but I'm not going to do it in this video. But anyway, a couple of days later, that same priest saw me in public. And he walks over, and as only a little kid can be terrified by this, he comes up to me and he says, you know, I saw your father laughing at this whole entire thing, or looking like he was going to laugh when I was delivering what you boys, you know, you deserved way worse punishment than what you got, or whatever your parents did to you. I just want you to know your father, when he's in front of God at the end of his life, I can't guarantee that there'll be any good things for him after that. Now, as a little child, this threw me into a state of absolute stark terror. I remember I kept saying, well, I don't want my father and my grandfather to go to hell. I mean, I even went and said prayers about this. I said, you know, God, if you're going to send anybody to hell, you got to send me to hell. I don't want my father to go to hell for laughing. I don't want my grandfather to go to hell for laughing over this. I mean, it sounds so silly right now for me to talk about this the way I'm talking about this, and I promise I'm going to tie something together with this, but I took that very seriously. It gave me all kinds of complexes. It gave me all kinds of anxieties and worries. It kind of, I think, was a motivating factor behind a lot of fear and guilt and things like that I had when I was that age. I remember I said a swear word out loud one time, and there was this little voice in the back of my head, and it said, you know, you're already you've already put your father and grandfather in danger of going to hell, and now you're doing this. I mean, you got to get your act together, you know. Terrible, terrible that a priest would do that to a little boy, and terrible that it actually affected me the way it did. Well, several years later, we're going to get in our time travel machine. We're going to go to the early 2000s when I wandered into AA. And I was desperate, and I was all tore up from all the, you know, the liquor and all the other stuff that was happening. It's funny, my life wasn't as bad as it was going to get, you know, getting worse in AA all the time. But I don't remember when my first relapse happened, to be perfectly honest. I know for several weeks I just sat in the meetings. If I got called on, I didn't say anything. You know, I'd say, well, I'm glad to be here. This was the early days of AA when I actually believed everybody in AA had their act together, when I actually believed everybody was really doing these steps and really doing these the sponsor stuff and all that. I just wholeheartedly believed that this was it. It's kind of hard for me to describe what it was like back then in a way, because there was no social media, there was no YouTube, there was no Facebook, there was a few internet message boards, but unless you had a certain topic at hand, like a movie or something like that, they hadn't really taken off yet. It was still early 2000s. This was one of my first exposures to it. The most you could hope for that questioned AA was maybe a book, or maybe an article somewhere in a newspaper that would say something like, you know, it might have a few minor criticisms of Alcoholics Anonymous, but it pretty much, even the newspapers, the TV shows, we all know, I've talked about that in the pop culture video and everything, it all said the same thing. This is pretty much the only organization that's guaranteed to help anybody who's going to stop drinking. And I would sit there and I'd listen to them do the How It Works thing, and they would just say, you know, it's funny, I used to could recite it word for word verbatim, but it says, you know, there are some such unfortunates, they're not at fault, they seem to have been born that way, you know. And then it says they're naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Such a load of blabbering bullshit, to be perfectly honest. But it would say stuff like, you know, it's not their fault, they seem to have been born that way. There are such unfortunates who cannot recover, and all of that kind of thing. And it was filling my head up at the time with this absolute stark terror, because I remember in the first 2 and 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months when I was new to AA and I was sitting there listening to all of this, I kept hearing that if you do everything we tell you to do, you'll never want to drink again. I kept hearing, well, if you do everything we say do, the desire to drink alcohol will be lifted. And I had so many people talking about how, you know, they went to a meeting and all of a sudden the desire to drink was lifted like some fucking miracle, you know, out of the sky or whatnot. And it's something that I just realized not too long ago, but I had that same type of religious terror. I was like the little 9-10-year-old that I was terrified. If I pick up a drink, it might mean I'm one of these unfortunates. It might mean I'm one of those who's born that way. It might mean I'm one of those who can't make it. I hadn't actually gotten deep in the AA enough to realize how full of shit they all were at the time. I was really quite naive in retrospect, looking back on it, because I just accepted what they were saying like it was absolute gospel, like it was absolute truth, you know. Because, you know, everywhere I turned, everywhere I looked, you know, this was the go-to, this was the gold standard. And if you couldn't make it in the gold standard, then there was no hope for you whatsoever. I went into it for, you know, I'm going to say it was like 2-3 months when I first got exposed to it. And I stopped at a liquor store on the way home, and I bought a bottle of booze, and I drank it really quickly. It was like a half pint, and a half pint's just a drink for a guy like me. It was a half pint of bourbon, believe it or not. I hadn't got to the hardcore vodka stage yet with it, but I killed this half pint of bourbon, and nothing happened to me. Nothing bad happened. I didn't get a DUI. I didn't go to jail. That was almost a decade later or whatnot, but this is... I'm just establishing the way that my mind was working at this time. I got away with it. And at the minute I got away with it and I went to the meeting the very next day, I was just filled with this terrified anxiety, this terror that, I've done something unspeakable. I've done a crime. I've actually drank. And now I'm sitting in these meetings and these people are talking about these unfortunates, and these people are talking about these people who are constitutionally incapable of getting it. And I don't want to be one of these constitutionally incapable people who can't get it, but I don't know. Nothing bad happened when I picked up the fucking half pint, so I don't really want to talk about this, A couple of weeks went by and I'd already stopped and drank a couple of times more. It wasn't just the one half pint at this point, but the guilt was just eating me alive. It was just killing me. I just thought something terrible was going to happen to me. I kept thinking that like I was going to be punished for this or something like that. So I just burst out in the meeting. I think it was one of the very first times I ever shared an AA meeting, and I said, look, guys, I've been coming here for like 2 or 3. I could just see how nervous I was. I was like, guys, I've been coming here for 2 or 3 months, and I haven't been saying anything, but I've been drinking the whole fucking time, which that's not exactly true. But I was like a nervous wreck when I spewed it out. And of course, it was really surreal because there was this older lady that was sitting directly across from me, and she just started crying. And I was like, holy Jesus Christ, I must be a terrible person, And there were these strict, stern, dour old guys that, had to share after me and say some people aren't going to make it, some people aren't going to get it. I didn't understand the AA bullying dynamic at the time. And it was just awful. It was just, the whole thing was just awful. But I picked up the white chip. I did the little walk of shame, and I had everybody clapping, which is, can you get any more demeaning to a guy than this? But for a long time in AA, I had that same guilt complex and that same terrified mentality that I was committing a crime every time I took a drink, that I was committing some kind of unforgivable, unpardonable, blasphemous sin, for taking a drink. It was, and I don't think I was ever aware of just how bad that was bothering me. I think I had a comment on the channel not too long ago about a lot of people report when they leave AA that they don't have any problems quitting drinking. And I think one thing that was crucial, a couple of things that was crucial when I left AA was I was alone in life, for one thing. I didn't have some group judging me. I didn't have some, as far as a lot of my family, they had already written me off. They weren't speaking to me anymore. The people I was close to, like my father and grandfather, had passed on. So there was I was completely 100% in isolation. I didn't really believe in anything spiritual or any shit like that. And I didn't experience no miracle either. All the AA meetings, it's like, oh, I was alone. I was at the end of my rope, and then, white lights appeared, and I never wanted to drink again. And just bullshit. But nothing like that happened. I just came to this conclusion, I got to get myself out of this mess, which I did. And I'm not saying, because I'm some hero figure or something like that, but nobody was coming to save me. Nobody was coming to prop me up. Nobody was going to do shit for me, right? And over time, I realized that I'm not accountable to anybody for anything. I mean, if I commit a crime, obviously I'd be accountable for that. But I don't have to answer to a fucking group of people. And I don't have to answer to no fucking church or some twisted priest or some shit like that to alleviate my problems of guilt. That this guilt was all manufactured. Okay, all this guilt, whether it was a silly little event like an altar boy laughing over a silly little argument, or whether it was me drinking a half pint on the way home from a meeting and feeling like I committed some evil crime or something like that. This was all manufactured guilt. There's no basis in reality for that. Millions of people every day, they leave their job at the end of the day, or in the morning if they're a night shift worker, because one of my jobs is overnight, but they leave their shift or their job or whatever, and on the way home, they either stop and buy them a bottle, or they buy a 12-pack, they go home, they take showers, they watch TV, they drink a few, whatever. They're not feeling like they've committed some kind of unspeakable, unforgivable crime as a result of doing that, because let's be honest here, there is no crime in taking a drink. Can bad things happen as a result of drinking? Of course they can. I mean, would I ever get behind the wheel and drive drunk again? The thought of that is so terrifying to me. The idea that I ever did that is terrifying to me. I can't imagine doing something like that again. But it's not an immoral act in of itself to crack open a beer or take a swallow out of a bottle. Okay? There's no reason for all this manufactured guilt. There's no reason for this idea of believing that some divine authority is going to extract some kind of horrifying retribution on me, as a result of that. It was funny. It's been about 2 or 3 years ago, I'm going to say, maybe even longer. I can't remember the exact date. I didn't bookmark it, but I remember one of my family members who kind of talks to me because they're a black sheep like I am. They sent me a thing, and it was a released piece of paper by the Catholic Diocese of certain people. And of course, a lot of these people, the reason they released it is because they were no longer alive. But these were people who had been accused, of actually doing the things that kind of you hear about all the time in the news media. People who fondled little boys and people who raped children. And that guy's name, that priest, was one of the ones on that list. There was a state-by-state registry. You could just go to whatever state that you grew up in, and you could click on the state, and you could narrow it down by a certain region. They call them a diocese in the Catholic Church, and there his fucking name was. And I thought, you terrified a little 10-year-old over something silly, made him think his father was going to go to hell when you were doing something far, far, far worse. So, what kind of fucking religion is that? What kind of God, You're going to go to heaven even though you fondled little boys, but I'm going to burn in eternal fire because of a fucking piece of bread that you have told me is sacred? And it's the same thing with the guilt over having a drink. They take this thing in AA, in my opinion, and they criminalize something really, really that doesn't need to be criminalized. You have not committed an unspeakable act or an unspeakable crime against nature that's going to be paid in some repercussion that's going to be devastating to you because you cracked open a bottle. There's no telling how many people they've destroyed with that, giving them that mentality. I used to hear them say in AA all the time, "Oh, we've screwed up your drinking. You'll never enjoy your drinking again." Now, what you've done is you've given people a guilt complex that didn't even to be there, rather than give them a healthy discussion about what alcohol addiction really is. And it's about 22 minutes there of that. So I guess I'm going to sign off on that, and until next time.